I found out. My mom had been stealing my dad's military inheritance for years while treating me like dirt. My stepdad exposed her, and I made her pay back every penny. Hey, Reddit, you know how some people say family comes first? Yeah, well, sometimes family is the first to screw you over. Found out my mom had been treating my inheritance like her personal piggy bank for 7 years. What happened next was absolute chaos. Grab a snack and enjoy, folks. Read the whole thing, though. I typed it all on my phone. My fingers hurt. LOL. I'm Paul, 26 male. My father died when a Humvee rolled during night training at Fort Campbell. Staff Sergeant Eric Ryder, 28 years old, gone just like that. I was 12. The Army handed us a folded flag and some paperwork. Mom gave it about 6 months before she started dating again. Dad had this thing called a will. Smart guy, knew exactly what he wanted. Life insurance, military benefits, TSP account, all of it earmarked for my education and future. Mom would handle everything as personal representative until I turned 18. But Dad's biggest mistake was trusting her to follow through. Her name's Jenna, and she was the type of woman who could start drama over a grocery receipt. After the funeral, she leaned hard into the Grieving Widow Act. You know, church ladies brought casseroles for months. Everyone wanted to help the pretty widow with the sweet little boy. She even started wearing Dad's dog tags, which pissed me off because she'd complained about him wearing them around the house when he was alive. By 13, she was seeing Martin, construction guy with 2 kids from his ex, Bella, 15, and Josh, 14. Martin seemed solid and treated me decently. Guy had these calloused hands from years of work and actually listened when I talked about school. They moved in together when I was 14. Martin's kids came with the package when their mom decided to find herself in Colorado with some yoga instructors she met on Facebook. Martin didn't fight for formal custody, just quietly absorbed the responsibility while his ex sent birthday cards twice a year. He worked long hours supporting 5 people on a construction salary that was decent, but not meant for 5 people. Mom went back to part-time retail at Target, mostly to get out of the house. Bella struggled in school, spent every minute posting thirst traps on Instagram. Josh played video games until 3 a.m. and whined about chores like washing dishes was torture. I kept my grades up because that's what Dad would have wanted. Honor roll every semester, student council, the whole deal. Mom made the right noises about being proud, but her attention was elsewhere. Martin noticed my report cards, made an effort to celebrate with trips to Buffalo Wild Wings, but the guy was exhausted from pulling overtime just to keep us fed. By sophomore year, the favoritism was obvious. Mom bought Bella expensive makeup from Sephora, while telling me my sneakers were still perfectly good, even though the soles were separating. Josh got a PlayStation 5 for Christmas when they were impossible to find. I got a Target gift card and a lecture about appreciating what I had. So I started working part-time junior year at a local auto shop, partly for spending money, mostly because I wanted independence from watching Mom blow money we didn't have. The mechanic who hired me was a Marine vet who knew Dad from some VFW event. He taught me actual skills. Dad's estate paperwork lived in a filing cabinet in the basement. Mom had shown me basic documents when I turned 16. Copies of the will, some account statements, insurance papers. Everything looked legit, but I didn't understand what I was reading. The estate accounts showed balances around $50,000, but not much detail about where the original amounts had gone. What I did understand was that Dad wanted me to have opportunities he'd never had. The will mentioned education specifically, plus something about ensuring I could build a foundation for success without the limitations he'd faced growing up poor in Detroit. Jenna would reference this when talking about college, but always in vague terms about being responsible with money. Martin started asking more questions about my college plans during senior year. Guy grew up poor in South Texas, never went to college himself, but respected education like most working-class guys who understand what they'd missed. When he asked about financial aid and costs, Mom would handle those conversations. She'd mention the estate money and suggest that between that and aid, we should be able to make something work without taking massive loans. The first red flag came when I asked to meet with the estate advisor. I'd been researching college costs and realized even in-state engineering programs were going to run $40,000 a year. Mom said she'd handle the advisor meeting and get back to me. Weeks passed. When I brought it up again, she said the advisor recommended waiting until closer to graduation to avoid premature distributions that might hurt financial aid calculations. Right. Martin noticed the delay too. He'd been researching college costs himself, running numbers on his laptop after work, trying to figure out how much overtime he'd need to help with expenses. He pulled me aside and asked directly about estate details. I realized I didn't have good answers to any of his questions. The worst part was watching him stress about money I supposedly had access to. Guy was pricing out community college options and talking about me living at home to save costs, all while mom supposedly had $50,000 sitting in accounts for my education. Something wasn't adding up, and senior year was about to make everything crystal clear. Senior year brought college applications and the kind of financial stress that shows families' true colors. I'd researched schools with strong engineering programs and reasonable costs, but even in-state tuition was brutal. Mom kept saying the estate money would cover most expenses, but stayed vague whenever Martin or I asked for specifics. Meanwhile, she'd spend $200 at Target buying crap we didn't need. Martin started pushing harder for transparency after attending a financial aid seminar at my school. When I showed him scholarship applications and financial aid forms, he asked pointed questions about why we weren't including estate information. Mom would redirect these conversations, saying mixing estate money with financial aid was complicated. I started working extra shifts at the auto shop to save for application fees and campus visits. 60-hour weeks between school and work just to afford sending SAT scores to colleges. Mom praised my work ethic, but didn't offer to help with costs that should have been covered by Dad's money. Martin quietly slipped me cash a few times, though, saying college prep was an investment in my future. Bella was 20 by then, working part-time at Bath and Body Works and living at home rent-free while spending her paycheck on clothes and makeup. Josh had dropped out of community college after one semester, claiming his professors were biased against gamers, and spent most of his time streaming on Twitch to an audience of 12 viewers. Neither showed any interest in career planning, which seemed fine to Mom. Martin disagreed with Mom's enabling. He'd push Josh to look for warehouse work, encourage Bella to consider dental hygienist training. Mom would undermine these efforts by making excuses for their lack of motivation. She'd say they were still figuring things out and didn't need pressure to conform. Meanwhile, Martin was covering their car insurance and phone bills while they figured things out. Then the estate documents started looking suspicious when I examined them closely during winter break. Account statements showed regular withdrawals over the years, but Mom explained these as necessary expenses for my care and education. When I asked for details about what qualified as educational expenses, she mentioned things like school supplies, clothes, housing costs, even groceries, since proper nutrition supports academic performance. Something felt off about the math. Honestly, screw it. The whole thing felt off. Dad's life insurance payout had been substantial, and his TSP account had transferred into the estate accounts. Even accounting for management fees and reasonable expenses, the remaining balance seemed low for 7 years of growth. I started researching typical investment performance and realized our accounts were significantly underperforming, if they were actually being invested at all. Martin noticed my research and started asking his own questions about estate management. Guy never dealt with inheritances, but he understood basic investing through his 401k. He'd been steadily contributing for 15 years and could see how compound growth was supposed to work. When Mom continued deflecting requests for detailed accounting, he suggested we meet with the estate advisor together. That's when Mom's excuses became elaborate. The advisor was busy with other clients. Accounts were in transition between management companies. Tax implications needed resolving before major distributions. Every explanation bought her more time, but Martin was losing patience. He'd started making comments about how we could have saved for college ourselves if we'd known the estate money wasn't reliable. Then I found the first concrete evidence of problems when helping Mom file taxes in February. Among the documents was a 1099 form showing significant capital gains from an account I didn't recognize. When I asked about it, Mom said it was related to estate management and not something I needed to worry about. But the dollar amounts were large enough to cover a year of college tuition. Martin saw the same form while helping organize the tax documents and immediately snapped. He wanted to know why estate money was generating capital gains if it was sitting in conservative accounts for college expenses. Mom's explanation about rebalancing investments didn't satisfy him, especially when she couldn't provide details about what investments had been sold. The breaking point came when I received a scholarship notification requiring documentation of other financial resources. The full-ride engineering scholarship specifically asked for estate statements and projected distributions to ensure candidates actually needed financial assistance. Mom said she'd handle the paperwork, but weeks passed without submission. When I missed the scholarship deadline because of incomplete documentation, Martin erupted. He cornered her in the kitchen after work one evening, still wearing his concrete-stained boots. His voice was low and dangerous when he spoke. "Look, Jenna," he said, "I don't know what game you're playing here, but that kid's college money isn't your personal piggy bank. Either you show me those statements by Friday, or I'm calling that estate attorney myself." Mom tried to redirect the conversation. Darling, you don't understand the complexities of estate law. Just let me handle it. Martin wasn't having it. I understand that you've been giving me BS excuses for months while I work overtime trying to figure out how to pay for college. Show me the money, Jenna, or this conversation gets a lot more official. That night, I heard them arguing through the bedroom walls. Martin was using words like fiduciary duty and mismanagement, while Mom kept saying he didn't understand how estate law worked. The conversation ended with Martin saying he was going to contact the original estate attorney if Mom couldn't provide documentation within a week. I heard a door slam and Martin's truck starting up. Jenna's panic was obvious the next morning. She started making phone calls, claiming she was working to get updated statements from the financial advisor. But her behavior had shifted from evasive to desperate, and both Martin and I could sense that whatever truth she was hiding was about to surface. Mom's behavior became increasingly frantic as Martin's deadline approached. She'd disappear for hours claiming to meet with financial advisors, then return with vague updates about paperwork and processing delays. Martin wasn't buying any of it, and his patience was completely gone. He'd started sleeping at the job site more often, coming home only to shower and check on Josh and Bella. I started doing my own research into estate law and executor responsibilities. What I learned made Mom's excuses sound even more suspicious. Beneficiaries had rights to information about estate accounts, especially when approaching distribution age. The fact that I'd never received detailed statements or met with any financial advisor was a serious red flag. Martin made good on his threat and contacted Dad's original estate attorney. He'd found the contact information in Dad's old military records and called during his lunch break. The law firm was still operating, though the original attorney had retired. His partner agreed to meet with us to review the estate documentation and explain what should have happened over the past 7 years. Mom tried to convince us that involving attorneys was unnecessary and expensive. She claimed she'd finally gotten the documentation we needed and could explain everything herself. Martin told her the time for explanations had passed. You had 7 years to be honest, he said. Now we do this the hard way. The attorney meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I took off work, telling my boss I had a family emergency. Martin left his job site early, something he never did unless someone was in the hospital. Mom claimed she had to work at Target and couldn't attend, which was unusual since she was the personal representative. The attorney's office was downtown in an older building with wood paneling and law books that actually looked used. He pulled out a thick file and started walking us through what should have happened. Dad's estate had been substantial. Life insurance, military benefits, and TSP account totaled nearly $90,000 after taxes and final expenses. The will specified that most of this money should have been distributed to fund my education and future needs. According to the documentation, estate accounts had been established with a local bank. The attorney had copies of the initial funding documents showing the full amount being transferred to Mom's control as personal representative. But the recent statements I'd seen showed a balance of less than $15,000. Where had the other $75,000 gone? The attorney asked to see the detailed account records that should have been provided to me annually. When I explained I'd never received such records, his expression grew serious. He said beneficiaries were entitled to regular accounting of estate activities, and failure to provide such documentation was a significant concern that could indicate mismanagement or worse. Martin asked directly whether Mom's withdrawals over the years were legitimate. The attorney said that depended on what the money had been used for and whether those expenses were properly documented. Educational expenses were broadly defined, but executor discretion wasn't unlimited. Large withdrawals for non-educational purposes could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, which was basically legal theft. After that, we requested copies of all account activity from the bank. The attorney said this might take several days, but the records would show exactly how the estate money had been spent. He also mentioned that if there was evidence of mismanagement, legal remedies existed to recover wrongfully distributed funds. Mom could be held personally liable for every penny that had been improperly used. That evening, Martin confronted Mom with everything we'd learned. He demanded to know where $75,000 had gone and why she'd never provided proper accounting to me. She broke down crying and admitted she'd made some mistakes in managing the money, but claimed everything had been spent on legitimate family expenses. Martin asked for specifics while I recorded the conversation on my phone. She mentioned the down payment on our house, car repairs, medical bills, and various other costs over the years. Martin pointed out that most of these expenses had nothing to do with my education and asked why she'd used estate money instead of her own resources or his income. The truth started coming out in pieces. She admitted she'd been treating the estate accounts like a general family fund when money was tight. She'd convinced herself that supporting the household was indirectly supporting my welfare, so the withdrawals were technically legitimate. But she couldn't provide documentation for most expenses, and many were clearly personal rather than educational. Martin was disgusted. He'd been working extra hours to support the family while Mom had been spending money that belonged to me. "You watched me work my butt off with overtime," he said, "while you had $75,000 sitting there. You let me stress about college costs while you bought yourself a car with his dad's money." The bank records arrived the following week and confirmed our worst fears. The estate accounts had been drained through regular withdrawals, most of which coincided with major family purchases. A new Nissan Altima for Mom, down payment on the house, furniture and appliances, vacation to Disney World, none of it documented as educational expenses. Martin moved out that weekend. He said he couldn't live with someone who would steal from their own child and lie about it for years. Mom begged him to stay and work things out, claiming families should stick together during difficult times. Martin said the betrayal was too fundamental to overlook. Josh and Bella were shocked. Josh blamed me at first for causing drama. Then Martin explained the theft in terms even a dropout could understand. Bella was more supportive, saying she'd always wondered how Mom afforded certain purchases on her retail salary. The bank records painted a devastating picture of systematic theft, spanning 7 years. Mom had treated Dad's legacy like her personal ATM, funding a lifestyle that was never meant to be supported by my inheritance. The detailed transaction history showed exactly how she'd managed to burn through nearly $75,000 while maintaining the fiction that money was still available for my education. The largest single withdrawal had been $32,000 for the down payment on our current house. Mom had moved us there when I was 15, claiming we needed more space for the blended family and better schools. What she hadn't mentioned was that she was using my college fund to upgrade our living situation, while Martin struggled to make mortgage payments on a house that was too expensive for his income. Smaller withdrawals followed a predictable pattern. Car payments when she decided her old car was unreliable, and she needed something more professional for her target job. Furniture purchases when she redecorated the living room with stuff that cost more than Martin made in a month. Vacation expenses for family trips that I'd thought were funded by Martin's overtime work. The most infuriating entries were labeled as gifts and personal expenses. She had withdrawn money to help Bella with security deposits on apartments she'd inevitably abandon after fighting with roommates. She'd funded Josh's gaming equipment and computer upgrades, including a $3,000 setup that was more expensive than Martin's truck. She'd even given cash to her sister during a financial crisis, essentially stealing from my future to solve other people's problems. She was playing Captain America to everyone while treating me like I didn't exist. Martin reviewed the records with growing disgust and recognition. He'd been killing himself with overtime and side jobs to provide for a family that was secretly living beyond their means on stolen money. Mom had watched him sacrifice his health and time without ever mentioning she had access to tens of thousands of dollars. Every argument about money, every stress about bills, every canceled plan due to budget constraints, all of it unnecessary. Quick pause, fellas. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way. Thanks so much for your support. All right, back to the drama. The attorney explained the legal framework for recovering the money. As beneficiary, I had the right to demand a full accounting of estate activities. Since Jenna had clearly violated her fiduciary duties as personal representative, she could be held personally liable for every penny that had been improperly distributed. The court could order immediate repayment plus interest and attorney fees. But there was a practical problem. She had spent the money over several years and didn't have $75,000 available. Her current job at Target paid barely above minimum wage, maybe 25 hours per week, and she had no significant assets beyond her share of the house equity. Getting a judgment would be easier than actually collecting the money. The attorney suggested starting with a formal demand letter that laid out the violations and requested immediate repayment. If she couldn't provide restitution voluntarily, we could file a petition to compel accounting and pursue legal remedies. The goal would be to identify recoverable assets and establish a repayment plan that captured her future earnings if necessary. Then I discovered an additional piece of evidence while researching Dad's military records online through the VA portal. Among his personnel files was a JAG memo dated 6 months before his death that referenced updating his will due to marital concerns and uncertainty about spouse's financial reliability. Dad had suspected something was wrong in his marriage and had specifically structured the estate to protect my inheritance from Mom's poor judgment. The bomb, though? The memo also referenced concerns about potential infidelity and recommended asset protection strategies to prevent spousal misconduct from affecting the beneficiary's inheritance. Dad had tried to protect me from exactly what Mom had done, but he'd made the mistake of trusting her to follow the legal restrictions instead of understanding that she'd ignore them if convenient. Martin read the JAG memo and immediately understood the implications. Dad had died, thinking he'd protected my future, never knowing that Mom would steal everything he'd worked to provide. Your father knew, Martin said. He knew she couldn't be trusted with money, and he tried to stop this from happening. Mom's reaction to learning about the memo was pure panic, which told the whole story. She'd never known that Dad suspected her of cheating, or that he'd specifically designed the estate to limit her access to my inheritance. The evidence that Dad had doubted her integrity undermined all her claims about acting in my best interests. Martin wasn't interested in her manipulation anymore. He said the time for apologies had passed when she made the decision to steal from a child whose father had died serving his country. He packed his belongings and moved into an extended stay hotel while looking for permanent housing. The attorney filed the formal demand letter on a Friday afternoon. It gave Mom 30 days to provide full restitution or face immediate legal action to recover the stolen funds. The letter also requested detailed documentation of all expenditures and put her on notice that any further dissipation of assets would result in additional penalties. Mom tried calling Martin repeatedly that weekend, but he'd blocked her number. She attempted to reach me through social media and text messages, alternating between apologies and accusations that I was being manipulated by outsiders who didn't understand family dynamics. She claimed that families should work out problems privately without involving lawyers and courts. Who saw that coming? My biological mom tried to manipulate me again, while my stepfather stood by my side. The irony was so thick, I still ignored her attempts at communication. She'd had 7 years to do the right thing and had chosen theft over honesty at every opportunity. Mom's response to the demand letter was pathetic. Instead of addressing the restitution request, she hired a bottom-tier lawyer who sent a rambling response claiming that all estate expenditures had been legitimate family expenses. The letter argued that supporting household stability was indirectly educational and that beneficiaries shouldn't question executor discretion. Lol. Our attorney laughed while reading the response. He said Mom's lawyer was clearly inexperienced with estate law and had essentially admitted to every violation we'd alleged. The argument that stealing money for personal use was somehow beneficial to the beneficiary was legally frivolous and would be demolished in court. Martin had found a small apartment across town and was proceeding with divorce papers. He'd consulted his own attorney about arrangements for Bella and Josh, who were technically adults but still financially dependent. Martin wanted to ensure they maintained stability while distancing himself from Mom's financial crimes. We filed the petition to compel accounting in early March. The court papers laid out the estate violations in detail and requested immediate judicial oversight of any remaining assets. The petition also asked for legal remedies that would allow us to claw back money that had been improperly distributed to third parties, including Bella's apartment deposits and Josh's gaming equipment. Mom's reaction to being served with court papers was predictable. She called Martin crying and claiming we were destroying the family over money that had been spent years ago on family needs. Martin told her that she'd destroyed the family when she decided to steal from her own child, and legal action was simply the consequence of choices she'd made repeatedly over 7 years. During the brief delay before our court date, we discovered that Mom had been attempting to transfer assets to avoid collection efforts. She'd tried to add Bella's name to her checking account and had inquired about selling her share of the house to her sister for below market value. These transactions constituted fraudulent transfers designed to evade creditor claims. Our attorney immediately filed for a temporary restraining order preventing Mom from disposing of any assets pending resolution of the case. The court granted the order within hours and required Mom to provide a complete financial disclosure under oath. Any violation would have consequences. Years of living beyond her means on stolen money had left her with virtually no savings and significant credit card debt. Her only substantial asset was her partial interest in the house, which was encumbered by Martin's mortgage payments and now subject to the restraining order. The court hearing arrived in April. Mom appeared with her discount lawyer and immediately started crying when the judge began reviewing the case. Our attorney presented the bank records showing systematic misappropriation of estate funds over 7 years. The pattern of self-dealing was so obvious that even Mom's lawyer seemed embarrassed. Mom took the stand and tried to justify her actions, claiming financial hardship and confusion about executor responsibilities. The judge asked specific questions about including the house down payment and various gifts to family members. Jenna's answers were contradictory. When asked about the Disney World vacation that had cost $4,000 in estate money, she claimed it was educational because Josh had studied geography. Geography. Interesting. The judge ruled from the bench that Mom had clearly breached her fiduciary duties and was liable for full restitution of improperly distributed funds. The court ordered immediate repayment of $73,000 plus interest and attorney fees, bringing the total judgment to over $80,000. Since Mom lacked liquid assets, the judge established a wage garnishment plan, capturing 25% of her disposable earnings. She collapsed when the judgment was announced. Her lawyer tried to argue that the garnishment percentage was excessive given her limited income, but the judge said Mom's theft had been deliberate. The court also ordered the sale of her house interest if she fell behind on payments or attempted to hide additional assets. Martin was waiting outside the courtroom when we emerged. He said he was proud of me. The financial recovery would take years, but at least Mom would finally face consequences for stealing from a military family. The local newspaper covered the story because of the military angle and the large dollar amount involved. Mom was mortified by that, but the article accurately portrayed her as someone who had stolen from her own child's inheritance. The veteran community's reaction was particularly harsh. The court victory was satisfying, but it had its own challenge. Mom's retail job at Target paid minimal wages, and even with 25% garnishment, the repayment timeline stretched over 15 years. Our attorney filed additional motions to accelerate collection by targeting her house equity and any future windfall income or tax refunds. Martin's divorce proceedings revealed the full extent of Mom's deception during their marriage. He'd been faithfully paying the mortgage and household expenses, while she secretly supplemented their lifestyle with stolen estate money. Mom had committed fraud by hiding financial resources. The division of marital assets became complicated by Mom's theft judgment. Martin had a legal claim to half the house equity based on 7 years of mortgage payments, but my restitution order took priority. The court appointed a receiver to oversee the property sale and ensure proper distribution of proceeds according to legal priorities. She tried to negotiate a settlement that would allow her to remain in the house while making payments, but the numbers didn't work. Her garnished wages from Target couldn't support mortgage payments, utilities, and restitution obligations simultaneously. The forced sale was inevitable. Josh and Bella both chose to live with Martin, rather than deal with Mom's increasing financial desperation and legal problems. The divorce formalized financial and living boundaries, establishing Martin as their primary support while limiting Mom's ability to burden them with her financial obligations. Josh surprised everyone by cutting contact with Mom entirely. He said he was disgusted by her theft and didn't want to be associated with someone who would steal from family members. Bella maintained minimal contact, but made it clear she blamed Mom for destroying their family stability. She'd started working full-time and contributing to household expenses at Martin's place. The 2 kids she favored over me for years were turning against her. I hope it's worth it. Besides, it wasn't. The house sale netted $62,000 after paying off the mortgage and sale expenses. Mom's share was immediately applied to the restitution judgment, reducing her remaining debt to approximately $18,000. The sale proceeds accelerated her repayment timeline from 15 years to roughly 8 years. Mom had to move in with her sister, who was reluctant to provide long-term housing for someone with a history of financial irresponsibility. She imposed strict conditions including complete transparency about Mom's finances and no access to family funds or credit accounts. Me? I started college in the fall with partial funding from the recovered house proceeds. The remaining balance would come from financial aid, scholarships, and part-time work, but at least I had a foundation to build from. Dad's sacrifice wouldn't go to waste. He'd be proud of me, I am sure. Martin found a smaller place closer to his work. He said the divorce had been expensive and emotionally draining, but necessary to protect himself from Mom's financial recklessness. Mom's attempts to rebuild relationships with her children had failed. Bella tolerated occasional contact, but refused to provide emotional support or financial help. Josh maintained complete no contact and told other family members that he considered Mom dead to him. Our attorney continued monitoring Mom's compliance with the garnishment order and filed regular motions to ensure she wasn't hiding assets or income. Mom had attempted to work additional jobs under the table, but we tracked her activities and reported violations to the court. Any attempt to evade the judgment resulted in additional penalties and fees. The legal process had taken nearly 2 years from discovery to enforcement, but the outcome was satisfying. Jenna had lost her house, her marriage, her relationship with her children, and a significant portion of her future earnings. The theft that had funded years of comfortable living would now result in decades of financial hardship. Martin occasionally provided updates about Mom's living situation and financial struggles. She'd been forced to take a second part-time job at a gas station to afford basic living expenses after garnishment, but her age and lack of skills limited her employment options. The engineering program was everything Dad had wanted for me. I'd found my place among other students who understood hard work and sacrifice, many of them from military families or working-class backgrounds. My story spread through the Veteran Student Organization, and several older students shared their own experiences. 3 years into the garnishment schedule, Mom made her first serious attempt to negotiate a reduction in payments. Her lawyer filed a motion claiming financial hardship and requesting modification of the judgment terms. The petition argued that her current living situation was unsustainable and that the garnishment percentage should be reduced. Our attorney opposed the motion. We showed that her hardship was entirely self-inflicted and that she continued to prioritize non-essential expenses over restitution obligations. The court had already considered her basic needs when establishing the original garnishment percentage. Mom took the stand again, this time appearing older and more defeated than during the original trial. She claimed that the garnishment made it impossible to maintain stable housing or employment, and requested mercy based on her deteriorating health and social isolation. The financial records revealed that Mom had been spending money on lottery tickets, restaurant meals, and other discretionary purchases while claiming poverty. She'd also received occasional cash gifts from sympathetic relatives, but had failed to report this income or apply it toward restitution obligations. The judge denied the modification request and warned Mom that future attempts to evade payment obligations would result in contempt proceedings. Now about her relationship with extended family members. It was imploding. All relatives knew about the theft, and most had distanced themselves from her. The few family members who initially offered support had grown tired of her constant financial requests and victim role. Mom's sister eventually asked her to find alternative housing after finding out that Mom had been stealing small amounts of cash and household items. The pattern of theft hadn't ended with the court judgment. Mom continued to take whatever she could access. The forced move to a studio apartment in a rougher neighborhood marked another step down in Mom's declining circumstances. Her landlord required weekly rent payments because of her poor credit history, and she struggled to maintain even basic utilities. I graduated college debt-free thanks to the recovered house proceeds and various scholarships I'd earned through academic achievement. The engineering degree Dad had hoped I'd pursue led to a well-paying job with excellent benefits at a defense contractor. I finally achieved what he'd planned for me, and I could never be more grateful. Martin attended my graduation ceremony with Josh and Bella, who had both turned their lives around under his guidance. He said he was proud of how I'd handled the difficult family situation and honored Dad's memory through success. Mom? She sent a graduation card with a letter claiming credit for my success and asking for reconciliation. She said that our family should move past old issues and focus on rebuilding our relationship. The whole thing was pathetic. I threw the card away and never responded. She had lost the right to be a part of my achievements when she chose to steal what Dad had provided to make them possible. The garnishment schedule showed approximately 5 more years of payments before the debt would be satisfied. Mom would be approaching retirement age by then, with no savings and limited Social Security benefits. My dating life had been affected by the family drama, with several relationships ending when women learned about the ongoing legal situation. Most people couldn't understand how a mother could steal from her own child. The engineering job led to security clearance requirements, which meant extensive background investigations. The financial judgment against Mom actually worked in my favor. 7 years after the initial court judgment, Jenna made her final attempt at reconciliation, this time face-to-face. She appeared at my workplace unannounced, somehow having found my address through online searches or family connections. Building security called me down to the lobby, where I found an old woman standing there alone, Mom. Her appearance was shocking. She looked older and defeated. Years of financial stress, social isolation, and manual labor had taken their toll. "Please, son, just hear me out," she said before I could speak. "I know I made mistakes, but enough time has passed. We're family. We're not family," I cut her off. "You stole from me. I never meant to steal. I was managing the money for the family's benefit." "Stop it! You did it for your benefit. Dad's money bought you a car, a house, vacations. What did I get? 60-hour work weeks just to afford college applications." Her voice cracked. "I was going to pay for your college." "With what? You spent everything. There were 15 grand, left out of 90. I can make it right now. I've learned from my mistakes." "Make it right?" I pulled out my phone. "You spent years paying back money you stole from your own kid. You think saying sorry fixes that? You can't hold this against me forever." Good children forgive their parents. Good parents don't steal from their children. Good parents don't watch their partner work himself to death while hiding 75 grand. But I'm your mother, she shrieked as the security guard approached. You can't just throw me away. You threw it away when you stole my dad's money, I replied. I'm just returning the favor. The security guard stepped forward. Ma'am, you need to leave now. This isn't over, Mom shouted as she was escorted out. You'll regret this when I'm gone. You'll eat yourself when I'm dead. I only regret having you as a mother. The final garnishment payment was processed 6 months later, marking the end of an 8-year journey from theft to full restitution. Mom had repaid every dollar she'd stolen, plus interest and attorney fees, but the money couldn't restore the years of lies or repair the relationships she'd destroyed. Martin sent a text when the judgment was satisfied. He congratulated me and said that Dad would have been proud of how I'd handled the situation. Mom's retirement years would be spent in poverty, living in subsidized housing with minimal Social Security benefits. She'd burned through every family relationship and destroyed her reputation within the community. The comfortable lifestyle she'd enjoyed on stolen money had been replaced by isolation and financial hardship. The engineering career Dad had envisioned for me was thriving. I'd used the recovered inheritance money to build a foundation for success that honored his sacrifice and planning. Mom's attempt to steal that opportunity had ultimately failed. The house Dad never got to see me buy was purchased with clean money earned through the education he'd planned for me. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's greed define your future. I maintained no contact with Mom and had no intention of changing that. The consequences of her actions would follow her to the grave, exactly as they should.